Welcome this afternoon. We're here to talk about, I believe, Performance Clackamas, right?
Yes, this is a Performance Clackamas update on your strategic priority commissioners of build a strong infrastructure. We have staff from Transportation and Development, Public and Government Affairs, Health, Housing and Human Services, and Business and Community Services to update you on your two goals under this performance priority. Today is just an informational update. It is not a decision-making point. It is a chance for the staff to update you commissioners on your goals and the achievements that have been achieved to date and feedback on the staff, the successes and challenges. So I'm not sure who's starting, but please go ahead and kick it off. Dan Johnson.
Good afternoon, board. Dan Johnson, Director of Transportation Development. Pleased to be here and share how our departments have been strategically coordinating to achieve your goals. As noted, we are here to discuss first of all, to discuss the I-205 implementation strategy. But before we do, some historical content is important. The BCC has two sizable infrastructure objectives. Both the widening of I-205 and construction of the Sunrise are top BCC priorities. And both cost hundreds of millions of dollars that require external funding. Important projects, it's important that projects not conflict with one another in our advocacy. So our recent strategy around this issue was for the county to focus I-205 funding advocacy at the state and federal levels due to its statewide significance as a federal interstate and tied directly into the legislature's work in 2017 on a state transportation package. As to Sunrise, the county has focused funding advocacy at the regional level at this point. In the past, we've received funds from both the state and federal governments, but in more recent times, it's tied directly into Metro's work on the regional transportation funding measure. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Sue for a deeper dive into the specifics of the board's I-205 goal. Would ask you please let us get through the entirety of the presentation, and then we can answer any questions you may have. With that, Sue.
Hello, commissioners. Nice to see you. Dan and I share leadership on the I-205 goal, so I'm very thankful for that. I'm learning from him. Your I-205 goal is that by 2024, funding for I-205, widening and seismic improvement projects, including the Abernathy Bridge, will be committed from federal, state, and/or regional funding sources. We have a great implementation team, and it's a pleasure to sit at this table. It's a strong partnership between DTD and PGA, and additional future involvement from BCS and H3S. So from PGA, we have Chris Lyons, Trent Wilson, and me. From DTD, we have Dan Johnson, Mike Besner, and Jamie Stasny. From BCS, Sarah Ekman. From H3S, Abe Moland. And then representing you is Kimberly DeSantis at the table. This goal, as you know, relates to a number of your other county objectives, primarily Sunrise, the Climate Action Plan, carbon neutrality, healthy and active lifestyle, equity, diversity and inclusion, and congestion relief generally. We have lots of strategies because this is a heavy lift, as you know. Let me just run through them, and then I know we'll have more time to talk about them. The first one is communications, really articulating the need for the project and making sure that that's reaching diverse and multiple audiences. The second is the funding strategy development, which is identifying potential funding sources and timelines. The third is government relations, state legislative engagement and advocacy, which has to date really been about building project support within the Clackamas caucus and amongst key legislators. Also with government relations is the agency piece. So identifying and engaging the key decision makers at ODOT and at the Oregon Transportation Commission. And then there is government relations at the local and regional level and the coordination there, where we're engaging key stakeholders, both within the county, but maybe more importantly now outside the county. We really want the region advocating for 205, not just Clackamas County. And then of course, there's the federal advocacy, which is trying to position I-205 for any funding opportunities at the federal level. So really, this project engages every level of our advocacy platform. There have been some wins already, and Chris has been leading a lot of that, so I'm going to let him walk through those.
Hi, commissioners. So yeah, we have a handful of wins that I think we can be proud to talk about. First and foremost, working at the regional level with so many of our partners, the I-205 project now a number of years ago was identified as a regional priority that was looked at as something that we could all work on together, both in our work at the federal level as well as our advocacy at the state level. And that led to, in 2017, when the legislature was developing its state transportation package, prioritization of that project in HB 2017 as one of the three bottleneck projects of statewide significance, which was, again, in large part because of that regional effort where we all worked hand in hand to put that forward alongside the Rose Quarter and Highway 217. As part of that, at the state level, the state provided some funding towards the project, as well as a budget note that called on ODOT to fully fund the project. Since that time, the Oregon Transportation Commission has fully funded design to the tune of $56 million. And as of today, the project is now at 60% design, which more or less means it is shovel ready, pending construction funding to finish off that design and move to construction. Another big win, I would say, is that all Clackamas County jurisdictions are unified behind this project. It's really been a unifier for the county family, so to speak. All of our jurisdictions at the C4 table have rallied around it and identified it as the transportation priority for all Clackamas jurisdictions. So that's really helped us in our advocacy externally. At the state level, the Clackamas Caucus has also rallied around it, in part because they've heard from all of their local jurisdictions, and they've made it one of their top priorities to push for at the legislature. And outside of the caucus itself, a number of key legislative transportation leaders have acknowledged that it is a key statewide priority, and have committed to insisting that it move forward towards construction in a rapid fashion. Most recently, Senator Beyer noting that in a meeting just about a week ago that he wants to see the Abernathy Bridge construction move forward in 2022, and he's very insistent on that. So that's great news. And he is the co-chair of the Joint Transportation Committee. And his fellow co-chair, Susan McLean, is also of like mind. And lastly, most recently, over the past 6 months or so, we have been working to advocate for a stakeholder table to be brought together by the Oregon Transportation Commission to identify how the funding will be committed for this project, since construction funding is still elusive. And that led just a couple of weeks ago to the Oregon Transportation Commission directing ODOT to ODOT's Urban Mobility Office to do a comprehensive congestion management plan, essentially a implementation and financing plan for the bottleneck projects, as well as other regional congestion projects that are priority level. And so they'll be doing that over the next 3 months and looking broadly at ways they can make these projects a reality. And so that was a huge win, and we'll be tracking that process closely. Now we have a few critical points coming up in November and December that we wanted to highlight. First, the election itself will have some major implications, particularly at the federal level. We are hearing that there is a possibility on a number of things. One, there could be an infrastructure package put together as soon as later this year or early next year, depending on how the election turns out, as well as a economic stimulus package. Those may be one and the same. And then possible return of earmarks, depending on the balance of power in Congress and the White House. And 205 is really well positioned for all of those opportunities, given that it is so close to being shovel ready, and it is a mega project of statewide significance and a federal interstate. A second critical point is in December, the Oregon Transportation Commission will be potentially making key decisions on both that comprehensive congestion management plan that I mentioned that is being developed right now, as well as the statewide transportation improvement program. And both of those issues could have major implications on how this project is prioritized and ultimately funded for construction. And then lastly, our local election will have indirect implications, particularly the outcome of the Get Moving ballot measure, and the direction or the outcome of that will influence how our region moves forward with looking to prioritize and fund all of these transportation projects that are on these various lists. So that will in some way affect how we want to handle 205 moving forward. And then we also want to mention a handful of barriers and challenges that are associated with the project, and I'll name a few, and then Mike Besner will take over for a few others. First off, the I-205 project is extremely expensive. It's a $500 million project, and there is a lack of available funding, both currently committed for the construction of the project, as well as just a general lack of available revenue sources that we can tap into at the different levels of government. Second, the project is not a county facility. It is managed by ODOT. It's a federal interstate. But that said, and you'll see in your packet, I believe it's on page 4 or 5, we've identified, or we've drafted up a organizational chart, more or less, of the different committees that are out there that have a hand in looking at how they're going to address this project. And by and large, the legislature and ODOT are driving this process, but Clackamas County is doing everything that we can to influence the outcome, which includes everything from coordinating closely with our regional partners to make sure that we have unified advocacy in pushing it, as well as inventing different groups and committees to formally weigh in those different official processes that are stood up by ODOT and the legislature. So it's a very complex animal, and there are so many different committees and stakeholders involved in this entire thing. And third, there's a big need to make sure we're involving the business community because they have such a major stake in this. They were a critical component in the development of HB 2017, with particularly the Trucking Association and AAA. And we've done quite a bit of work to engage our local businesses and some regional business alliances. But the more that we can continue building up a coalition of business support, the more that's going to be helpful to our overall advocacy efforts. And I think there's more that we can do on that front. So we're going to continue working that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike to take over on a few other challenges.
Thank you, Chris. So probably the big elephant in the room, not probably, is tolling. It's taken on a life of its own. Really, the actual I-205 project is somewhat straightforward and non-controversial, but then the tolling, it's the one going through the NEPA process, and there's so many unknowns. First off, we know it won't be implemented for quite some time. They're just not ready. They got to get through the NEPA process. It's going to take a while. We also know that the tolling, even if we were all okay with it, it's not going to pay for the entire project. None of the models that we're aware of show that it can make the project whole. There's also a movement now to look at the entire system. So we're talking 5 and 205, looking at tolling the entire thing, which then expands everything else. And adds more questions. How much funds will be generated and where will those funds be spent and what will they be spent on? We've already talked quite a bit. I know Commissioner Savas mentions it quite a bit, the lack of transit alternatives in this corridor. There basically aren't any. We're concerned about the equity when it comes to tolling and the diversion into other communities, especially communities that have equity focuses, like Canby and like Gladstone. And then Chris already mentioned the regional funding measure. Hard to say exactly if that passes, how it will affect this, but it suddenly will add so many more projects to the regional list, and including a lot of more transit projects. So it's hard to envision anything other than that making things even more competitive moving forward. So tolling's the big one, but despite these, there are a lot of things that are working well right now, and Jamie's going to talk a little about that.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon. As my colleagues have shared, there are a lot of things that are going well with this project. There's a tremendous amount of regional effort going on right now. And I want to remind you all, this is a regional system. I know we all know that, but I think sometimes it's so easy to get focused on one project. And so important to keep in mind that this is a regional system and that 205 is a critical part of that regional system, which is why we've been doing so much regional coordination, as I think everyone has mentioned so far. So that is going well. There has been a funding and outreach strategy that was designed. We are implementing that very well. I think we're being very intentional about communication and connection with different staff members as well as electeds, and coordinating conversations really thoughtfully so that we can be engaged in the formation of the funding plans instead of just kind of presented with an option and then expected to respond. So we're really working hard to actively engage in those conversations. The state legislative coordination is going well. It's a top priority of our Clackamas caucus, and Chris Lyons has been working very hard on that. Very helpful to have a strong legislative voice of support for this project. That work has been going on for quite some time, so we're happy to see that is kind of evolving even further, and that those voices are really solid and consistent. Agency coordination has been very helpful. As I mentioned before, we're engaging with all of these partners in the region. And it's interesting, as we're doing regional engagement, it's not just engaging about this one project, as I mentioned, it's engaging in the whole regional system. And there's a lot of projects and processes and funding sources that are engaged, that are involved in all of that. So it's showing up and being able to engage on all of those things, not just coming to the table with an ask for something that we want. So we're working really hard on that kind of cohesive engagement and relationship building. That effort at the agency level is extended into the regional coordination, which I mentioned before, working very closely with Metro, the cities, the other counties, and the business alliances, as Chris mentioned. Also local coordination, a lot of frequent engagement at C4 Metro with our cities and with the business groups and other meetings. So we're out there a lot, talking to everyone, seeing what they're thinking, what's happening, and how we can all work together. And lastly, I would say our internal team coordination. I know that it was mentioned that we're all working closely together, but I'll tell you, there's a tremendous amount of effort focused on this goal, and we're working on it every week together as a very high priority, and figuring out how it fits in with all of the other things that we're doing and how we can leverage those things to keep moving this project forward. So internal coordination has been great, and I think it's on an ever evolving trajectory. So Thank you. And Sue, I believe, is going to wrap us up with next steps.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So in terms of what's next, first and foremost, now through the end of the year, we're closely coordinating with ODOT on their work to develop their comprehensive congestion management plan, because that will really inform the next steps on the legislature piece and implementation and funding of the mega projects. And there's been lots of good engagement around that, including a meeting with Chair Van Brocklin and Paul and Chris Strickler. So good things moving there. We're engaging closely with the Clackamas caucus and other transportation-focused legislators in advance of and during the session, so that we can see if there's going to be funding potential there. We're working closely with DTD to track and engage in the statewide transportation improvement program process, which has some funding implications for the project. And then we're closely tracking the federal level and what's going to happen there, what's going to change there. Is there a possible infrastructure bill or a stimulus package coming out of the election? And then this idea that earmarks might come back could really change the conversation there. It's been a long time since we've seen those. Obviously, to be successful, all of this requires a really close coordination with our partners, local, regional, and state, and the business community, as Jamie just talked about. We've even been kicking around the idea of a freight coalition, trying to figure out new levers on the process that can help move it forward. But obviously, this is such a large ask. It needs a really robust political coalition around it, which we're all of us involved in building. And I think I will leave it there, and we're all ready to take questions or thoughts or direction.
All right, team, thank you very much. I just want to note that C4 Executive Committee last night did draft a letter to support a funding of transit on 205, connecting Tualatin, Wilsonville, and Oregon City, I believe. Anyway, Paul.
Yeah, I just want to, give my thanks and gratitude towards all the staff involved on this. We meet every Monday. I think we're practically second family now, because we meet so frequently, and there's a lot going on. If you look at page 5 of your packet, and you look at those, all of those groups, I'm opening it right now to look at it again. The legislature, the OTC, the Clackamas County Coordinating Committee, ODOT itself, the Region 1 Act, the ODOT Office of Urban Mobility, the Tolling Diversion Policy Group, the Equity Mobility Advisory Committee, the Modeling Subcommittee, the Multimodal Subcommittee, the Leaders for Equity Diversion, LDIC, Tolling Diversion Technical Committee, and there's a whole bunch more that are existing out over there. So there's a lot of work going on. Tomorrow morning, we meet as a subcommittee, Metro Subcommittee, a C4 Metro Subcommittee to discuss, the letter that Jim just mentioned. But if I go back to when I first took the reins, if you will, as the JPAC rep, and I wanted to find out what we had in the queue for our plans for transportation projects and where they were prioritized, there was nothing prioritized. A lot of the structure that I just expressed, half of it wasn't even there. So there is so much activity right now, and staff has really stepped up the game. I appreciate Dan's leadership and former Administrator Krupp, who initiated that effort to get more emphasis and a more regional presence for Clackamas County in the arena of transportation, and it's just coming together in a really good way. So I just want to just give my thanks to all the staff involved in trying to get all this underway. So that's the good. What staff I don't think did not mention here today, and don't want to pour cold water on this, but we just heard in the last week or two from ODOT that they've got this not on capital projects per se, but in their maintenance and ODOT's financial position as a result of COVID and everything else, that they have a $750 million shortfall right now, a projected shortfall. So we're in a budget crunch. So it's like being out in the middle of the desert with a bucket and a whole lot of people and not enough water to drink. So it's going to be interesting, whether it's earmarks that come down from the federal level or it's the legislature stepping up. But we need to find the money to make a lot of this work and come together. This is multi-pronged, so we are cognizant of climate. We're cognizant in the aspect of transit, safety, sidewalks, the whole 9 yards. So it's not just about capacity as far as pavement on the highways and freeways, even though these are both highway, freeway type projects. They all have elements of bike ped and transit. So we're kind of excited, and you'll be hearing here in about a month or so when staff presents the transit plan. We initiated that study. So that's another thing that's going to fold into the conversation as far as other aspects. So with that, I just, again, my gratitude to staff. I don't have much to add to what they're doing. We're just going to cross our fingers and hope that we see some money coming our way to initiate one of these two projects.
I'd just like to add one thing. I think one of the biggest challenges about 205 is that ODOT feels they've been mandated to fund it with tolls, and getting past that was going to require a legislative fix. I think, because that's all I ever hear is, yeah, we like 205. We'd like to do the project. We need more money to finish the design, but the legislature in House Bill 2017 said fund it using tolling. So that's a big thing we need bridge we need to cross. So anyway.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say that's a common misconception. HB 2017 did include tolling direction, and it did include 205 as being a priority project, but they weren't tied together. And so
Right.
we've been, that's been part of our work, is to make sure that decision makers are clear on how the two were or were not tied together, so that we can make sure that the funding piece of it is figured out appropriately.
Yeah. Anyway, any other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any. Good job. Thank you for your hard work. I look forward to driving on 205 expanded bridge and lanes in 2024 when the job will be done. All right.
Good to me.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Sunrise finally completed.
Yeah. I'm not going to hold my breath on that one.
Been
So
going
Gary,
on.
Gary, what's up? Thank you.
Are you done?
I believe so. I don't see.
No, I mean the staff.
We still have sunrise to do. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But you just gave us a great segue.
Yeah. Nice transition.
Okay. All right.
So again, I'll take the lead in kind of doing the introductions, then we'll kind of go from there. Just so obviously this is your goal, so you're very clear about what that goal is. By 2024, funding for the next phase from 122nd to 172nd of the Sunrise Gateway Multimodal Corridor improvements will be committed from federal, state, and/or regional funding sources. I want to do a quick shout out. And there's a lot of the same people on this team that there is on the 205 team, but it's important to acknowledge their work from Transportation Development, myself, Mike Besner, Jamie Stasny, from Public and Government Affairs, Sue Hildick, Chris Lyons, Trent Wilson, H3S, Rich Swift, Abe Moland, and Derek Ranke, Business and Community Services, Sarah Ekman, and from the County Administrator's Office, we have Kimberly DeSantis and Tracy Moreland that keep us on task, which is fabulous. I do want to go back. Those are kind words you had shared, Commissioner Savas, but I really want to highlight the good work of these people in positioning Clackamas County to be more successful in these transportation discussions. They are at all of these regional tables. They are building regional relationships that are going to make us more successful now and in the future. But just one quick note to highlight. So key strategies, a number of these relate directly to the work over the last year and our coordination with Metro on their proposed regional transportation funding measure. But we'll get started with government relations and regional coordination. Obviously, there's been a lot of work to kind of advance dialogue and discussion with our regional partners around this measure, while ensuring that our objectives and our values are represented in that measure as well. It's been the necessity to evolve a little bit, refining the project components and phases to meet the desired outcomes of that measure. It's been a good effort, or a continued effort on communication, clearly articulating the values of the project and making accurate, readily available information, so that all of our partners understand why this project is such a priority to the board and the residents of Clackamas County. It's also been a discussion around a funding strategy. I'm not going to share the price of this project. I'm going to leave that to Jamie here in a little bit. But as with the I-205 project, there's a sizable cost. And this can, and understanding phasing of those costs and project costs, identifying potential funding sources and timelines are all key in being strategic as we move forward on this discussion. Government relations, I touched on it earlier. I'm going to touch on it again. It's making sure that we continue to work with our regional partners to position the Sunrise for funding at the regional, state, and potentially the federal levels. There's a lot of competing interests out there, and we need to continue to have a discussion with them to ensure that the Sunrise is still in their minds as much as it is in ours. And last but not least, equitable community engagement, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and a dialogue around how we advance that nuance and build our understanding of what those community members living along that Sunrise corridor want and need from this project, building stories around that and messaging that on a local, regional, and federal level. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Besner to share a number of the wins that we've had so far. Mike?
Thanks, Dan. So so the biggest win so far is the inclusion of the Sunrise Complete Street and Local Connections project and full design funding of the entire project included in the Get Moving 2020 measure. And obviously we'll be hearing about that and knowing more about that here coming up shortly in a few weeks. But that was a large effort that took about a year and a half. Chair Bernard was on the task force for that. You know, and it for a while looked like it could go either way. We weren't even sure if it was going to be in there at all, but we fought, and it's in there, and it's a necessary phase of the Sunrise. It'll take care of all the existing Highway 212 work, all the local, a bunch of some new local streets that need to be constructed, multi-use path, bike ped facilities. A new interchange and a lot of projects that are needed in order to build the main line of the Sunrise. As part of that process, we actually established also a new line to Metro to do for coordination. That's been a big win from this as well. Because we had to fight so hard, we had countless meetings with Metro staff to explain the project and explain how important the project was and explain this isn't just another highway project. It has a lot more components to it. It's a jobs project and a housing project, for example, and a livability project. We did other regional coordination as well. We had to reach out to places like the city of Portland, who really didn't know much about other than what they were told that, you know, it's a quote highway project, and taught them, no, it's not. And it, again, established lines of communication that we'll be able to use moving forward. Also, as part of the C2C corridor project that Commissioner Savas is on the steering committee of, the Sunrise has high prioritization, and not just for the phases that might get paid for by Get Moving 2020, but then the next phases, including the construction of a roundabout at 212, 224, which is really, really important, and then the Sunrise itself. So definitely some wins here, and more to come on that, and more to come coming up. I mentioned the election coming up, and Trent will talk a little bit more about why that's so important.
Thanks, Mike. I'm here to talk about the election. If you haven't heard us say it yet, the election's coming up, and that's a really big deal for this project. If the measure passes, you know, we've essentially met the objective of moving this project into its next phase. And for those who are listening, from the public, I mean, you can look at our packet and see page 9, page 10, and get a better sense for what that project looks like on the ground. If it doesn't pass, and that, read the newspaper, it's possible. If it doesn't pass, we'll work with our regional partners to identify the best opportunity for funding moving forward. And a big part of that's going to be consensus building. And what Mike just said about building that relationship, having that direct line to Metro has been an incredibly important building block in this project that we've been able to really level up over the last 2 years in particular. And so part of this too, and we've mentioned it before, is not only our government affairs approach, but the legislative approach in this. And just to reiterate what we shared during the I-205 presentation, I-205 has really dominated our legislative work related to infrastructure. And this is for 2 main reasons. For years, we had both projects, I-205 and Sunrise, as top priorities because they are. They are for us, they are for our legislators, state and federal, but they constantly told us, these are 2 really big, expensive projects. We only have capacity for one, please pick one. That was really challenging for us to do for a long time. And then we got lucky 2 years ago when Metro moved towards this regional measure, and they said, we really want to focus on corridors. And that fit the Sunrise project really well and allowed us at the staff level and at the board level to have a big conversation about focusing our state and federal legislative work towards 205 and focusing our regional work on Sunrise. And I think we all feel here that this has been a successful strategy, both for I-205, you just heard all of the great work that's going on there, as well as Sunrise and how that's benefited from this. And so this measure is it's a really big deal for us. It's a really important step. If the measure passes, again, we're in a really good spot. And if it fails, and that's up to the voters, we'll have to recalibrate on what that looks like moving forward. But that is one of the challenges and one of the barriers to this project. And more on that would be bringing Jamie back into the conversation.
Thank you, Trent. Yes, so barriers and challenges for Sunrise. This is very dynamic. This project has a lot of different components to it. It's been going on for a long time and has a long history. And the values of our region are evolving. The criteria for funding projects is evolving. And this is an ongoing, ever-changing conversation that takes many different forms around the JPAC table, at the OTC. The conversation is changing and it's shifting away from the funding of construction of roads, just to be really blunt, and toward jurisdictional transfer and safety projects and other things. So just something to keep in mind, that's a challenge to keep a capacity project on the list at all, and even harder to prioritize it. Another challenge that we have is our funding limitations, which Commissioner Savas was talking about with regards to 205. There's funding shortfalls. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. There's a lot of priorities for funding. Resources are limited. And this project cost, which Dan alluded to earlier, is not small. It's $477 million for this project. It is a big, expensive capital project. So that is another challenge, is this limitation on funding and competing priorities. Another challenge that we have is our relationships with the business owners, the residents, and others who work in the area, to talk with them and have an open dialogue. So we had a great conversation during the Get Moving 2020 process. There was a lot of collaboration with the committees structure that was created, but we didn't get to do a lot of direct contact with the folks who live and work and own businesses in the corridor, just being really honest. And we need to really work to develop and nurture relationships and to do some engagement, have conversations about what's needed there. Additionally, there's near-term development needs in the Rock Creek employment area. Happy Valley is moving forward. They've been a great partner through all of this process. We've been collaborating very closely with them. And, there's near-term needs that aren't going to wait for the long-term solution. So how do we navigate those while at the same time still prioritizing the whole entire project and solution? And then finally, I think one of our challenges in the area is continuing to work on how we measure and articulate transportation equity. We need some help with refinement of policy definition to better support outreach, equitable outreach in the area in the future. And a lot of good work is already being done on that. We have our new equity office, and I think we're going to have a lot of support moving forward on equitable outreach, but it's a challenge that we face right now that we don't have a lot of policy guidance on that. Some good news though, we have a lot of things on this project that are working well. Our funding strategy that we've developed to really understand what funds are available, where do they come from, when do they become available, that is all being developed. It's constantly evolving as well, but we've gotten a really good handle on what those components are. And also, as Dan was saying, the cost of the project. The project has many different phases. It has different components. It serves different needs, and really understanding those different pieces. We've come a long way on that piece. And another thing that's working really well, and I was mentioning this before, is regional and state coordination. We have been working so hard, as I mentioned before, same relationships in a lot of cases. You know, this is all connected. These are all, you know, being worked on by the same agencies, the same regional conversation that's going on right now. So been working really hard to build relationships and trust with our partners, and to really show up and be a good regional partner for this regional system, as I mentioned before. Also, internal team coordination. Our team just has showed up in a huge way. As we navigated our way through the funding measure conversations, there was no consistency, predictability to the timing of the decisions. The project was ever evolving in order for us to figure out how we could make pieces of it fit. I'll tell you, our staff showed up and were flexible and ready to go. And I'm just so impressed and proud to be a part of this team. And I want to mention Karen Burig and Stephen Williams from DTD have been working on this forever. They have so much knowledge. They're always ready to step up and share and support and collaborate. So I just want to give them a shout out because they've been amazing as part of this team. Also, local coordination, as I mentioned before, a lot of local partners, our city partners, county partners, cross-jurisdictional collaboration. But a really good example of that is our partnership with Happy Valley. As I mentioned, they've been amazing. Worked really closely with them on the C2C or Clackamas to Columbia corridor plan, which Commissioner Savas was a part of the steering committee for. Just took a lot of, you know, reiteration of what are we doing, what are our priorities, how can we work together to make sure they're supported and brought forward in an effective way. And then also, I think what's working well are the emerging discussions around equity. And I mentioned this before, regionally and locally, equity discussions are at the front of every conversation. And they've really helped us to evolve our project design and our approach. And the project in the funding measure was refined to include elements that address safety and access for all people in all modes. So that's, I think, something that's really positive, that's having a really good effect on this project and looking forward at the future phases as well. I mentioned this one before, but I want to hit it again, that transportation equity piece. I think we've done a lot of good work. I think it's working well for the attention and the conversation and discussions that are happening around that. But again, it's both a challenge and something that's working well because it's an ever evolving conversation. I'm just really grateful that you all are prioritizing that conversation around equity because it's really important for us, for our region, and for this project as well to be successful. And Dan's going to wrap us up with next steps.
My apologies. What's next? So while the goals speak specifically to funding for the road, our implementation team members understand that this improvement is really about making that Sunrise Gateway a safe and attractive place for the people who live and work there. In order to better understand what the current residents and business owners want and need, a comprehensive planning process needs to occur with a robust, equitable public engagement plan. This next step would be funded should the measure pass, Metro's measure pass. If it does not pass, that conversation remains critical to provide a foundation for the project's needs and create a story around this particular project. Our strategic team members have projects that would help move this conversation forward, such as the health assessment from H3S. However, these projects will require staff time and other expenses, which we're committed to move forward on. If the measure does not pass, a couple things. We'll work together to develop a strategy to begin this equitable community engagement anyways, so that our strategic team can get a better understanding of the needs of the residences and the business owners in the corridor. Secondly, we're going to continue our region-wide coordination to position the Sunrise project as successfully as possible for local, regional, state, or federal funding. And that concludes our presentation. We'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
I'm up first. One thing not mentioned, I am the chair of the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization. And this corridor, the Sunrise, is the emergency corridor during a major earthquake. If you think about it, on the Willamette, Columbia River is a big stockpile of flammable fluids that would probably spill into the river, which means the river is not that corridor. So the Sunrise would be the access to emergency supplies from Eastern Oregon. Secondly, we lost a lot of affordable housing in the fire. Every community lost a lot of affordable housing, and this area provides an opportunity to. There are existing manufactured home parks provide an opportunity to increase that stock of manufactured housing and affordable housing, thanks to Happy Valley's Urban Renewal District, which we insisted that, and I hope you guys remember this in the future, insisted that a certain percentage of that went to affordable housing. So that's what I had to say, and I'm going to go to Paul.
Yeah, well, I again just want to, in this case, and I mentioned Don Krupp, former administrator, had initiated with DTD trying to get some more staffing around, our relations and putting ourselves in every room possible around the region. But I also want to give some credit to Administrator Schmidt for developing the implementation teams, the very group of people you have before you, and really being part of launching the gateway, the Sunrise Gateway project. So for those of you who don't know, or those who are listening to today or in the future, this meeting, 30-something years ago, this project was not just a highway project, but it really was the development and the future of Clackamas County. And by happenstance, some of that is taking place, but the 212 corridor and the future gateway aspects are really the economic engine of this county. There's so much industrial lands that are in play today, and there's also industrial lands that are sitting fallow, awaiting development or awaiting a road. And we have a lot of important opportunities in the future. Happy Valley's working on their Rock Creek area master plan, which has some commercial and a lot of housing opportunities, but not so much industrial as far as up the 224 corridor, just off of 212. But that little bottleneck right there, where it goes from 3 lanes to each way to 1 lane each way, and to Jim's point about in case of an emergency, that's not only a supply route, but it's also an escape route. And it was never more vivid, I don't think, than when the fires were happening and people were coming down, leaving Estacada, coming down the 224 corridor, and the people in Malala coming down the 213 corridor. A 20-minute trip or a 15-minute trip taking hours. I heard the horror stories, but if there is an emergency like Cascadia, that is an important route, and that does not. We've got to. And Jim, I appreciate your help with that and helping communicate that. But I do a lot. I still dabble a little bit in my world, so I'm going up and down the 212 corridor out in the industrial area and into Gresham. And so recently, I've been out in the Gresham for a few days here and there, and just notice the people have freshened up the roadside memorials. And I know that's a thought to think about, but imagine for a minute that where you see these roadside memorials are where people have lost their lives. And if you look at the shoulder of the road, this is an ODOT road. A lot of areas where these accidents happen, there's no shoulder. There is no safe shoulder. There's no safe way for a pedestrian or a bicyclist to go down these highways. And this is in the urban growth boundary. So we have a lot of issues. Transportation is not just the road, but it's all the safety elements that go right along with it, and the economic development issues. And the biggest thing that concerns me, with all the emphasis on housing right now, which is good, it's needed. But we are not talking about the job balance, the jobs housing balance, or the imbalance that we're growing. We need to work on that. And that in this gateway, the Sunrise Gateway project is really key to making up that difference and keeping that jobs balance aspect in there as well. So I can't say enough about how important it is. I can't say enough about how all the great work and all the team that's presenting before you today and all the good work. I really enjoy working with everyone, and just want to again say thank you for all of this. Now it's time for us to go find the money.
Well, we could start printing it. Any other questions? Anything additional to add, Dan, or anybody?
We will report back as soon as we have more information on, obviously, the election. It's going to have a pretty significant impact on our direction going forward, but we'll wait till November and see how that goes.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And Gary, what's up?
Commissioner Humberston has a question.
Oh, okay.
I was just going to comment that although most of the conversation was staff and Commissioner Bernard and Savas, that is, to the best of my knowledge, all of this commission supports these efforts 100%. We just don't all have to talk about it. But I don't know of anybody on this commission that's not on board with this. So I think the public needs to know that.
Thank you, Ken. All right. Thank you. And we'll move on to the next issue. Gary.
So we're going to see if Dan can bring his staff together to start the next session early. How much time do you need, Dan Johnson?
I'm trying to get a hold of them right now. So you should be, Jennifer Hughes and Martha Fritzie should be logging on here any moment. If we can bring them in.
Big five?
Yes.
Yeah, till 2:30.
Okay.
Yes.
30. Let's get going. Gary, what's up?
Next is short-term rentals. Update. So I asked staff to do this, commissioners, to make sure that you are ready to bring this forward for sure, because I don't want to waste your time or staff's time if you're not. So this should be a very quick session unless you're not ready, in which case we'll decide that pretty quickly here. So this is not a decision-making session. It's simply to check in where you left off when you last had a session on this, which was months ago, and prepare you to move forward. So with that, Dan, please go ahead.
Really can't expand on that. Basically, we have two parts to this discussion. First, I believe Martha Fritzie is going to have a dialogue regarding kind of the package as a whole, kind of where you were at when we suspended discussions around this kind of post-COVID or during that COVID episode. And then secondly, a discussion with Jennifer Hughes about what the schedule looks like, because there was two elements to the request, one of which was to start a discussion or a process around the entire program coming forward. And then secondly, a dialogue around trying to get that done by the end of the year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Martha Fritzie to kind of run through the current scope of the STR ordinances.
Okay, hi, thank you, and good afternoon. I'm going to pass on the skunk, but thank you for the offer. So I had to look back and spend a little bit of time reading through what happened back in the late winter, early spring, because lots and lots has happened since then. So I'm just going to very quickly run through the specifics of the program as it stood in February and March, the draft of the proposed county code amendments that would add the short-term rental registration and regulation program were attached to your worksheet. No changes have been made since the last time you saw it at the February hearing and also at the March policy session. As was mentioned in the worksheet, this draft is really the result of over a year of work of research and public outreach, a number of meetings with you all, numerous drafts, a lot of public and agency feedback. And so again, I'm going to try to be brief. We all recall, I hope, that a short-term rental is generally the rental of a dwelling unit or part of a dwelling unit or a guest house, as was added in, for less than 30 days at a time. That's what we're talking about with this program. Under the proposed program, which would be included in the county code, a short-term rental would be allowed in any legal permanent dwelling. with some exceptions. If, for example, a dwelling was only approved for a specific use like a farm worker, it would not be allowed to be used. It is also allowed in any legally established guest house. The regulations would apply to only the unincorporated areas of the county, not in the city limits. The regulations are largely the same countywide with one very notable exception. If the property is located within the Portland metro urban growth boundary, the dwelling would need to be, excuse me, the owner's primary residence or on the same tract as the owner's primary residence. All people proposing to run a short-term rental would need to register. This program would be administered through the finance department, which is the department that also administers the transient lodging tax or transient room tax. With the application, the applicant would need to demonstrate that all the regulations that are written into the county code can be met. This would include things like building code, life safety, fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, things like that. There would not be an inspection done by the county. All of the demonstration of the building, life, fire, safety regulations would be done through a self inspection affidavit that would be provided to the applicants. There's a requirement to post a placard inside the short-term rental that would include things like the registration number, a 24-hour contact, other important contact information like the fire district information, the maximum occupancy numbers, quiet hours, and other important things. Specific regulations that would need to be met include things like requiring off-street parking. The number that we had settled on at the last, certainly with this current draft, is 1 off-street parking space per 2 sleeping areas with a minimum of 1 space regardless. If there's only 1 sleeping area, you still have to have 1 space. There's provisions in there about having a plan for garbage pickup, again, specific building life safety requirements, a maximum occupancy, overnight occupancy of 2 people per sleeping area plus 4 additional folks. And that's to account for the fact that there might be a sleeper sofa. That doesn't technically count as a sleeping area, but that's one of the 4 additional occupants, overnight occupants. And then enforcement, which is always a big issue. Enforcement would be done by either the sheriff's department or code enforcement, depending on what the issue is. For example, the sheriff would still continue, as far as I know, to enforce the noise ordinance. If there's certainly any illegal activity, the sheriff would be called. They would be the ones dealing with blockage in the right of way and things like that. Code enforcement would deal with other violations. And that program, as we have proposed, like I said, is in the county code. That would go through a hearings process to adopt, which Jennifer is going to talk to you about that process. And any other specifics about the code, I'm certainly happy to attempt about the proposal. I'm happy to answer if I can, or we can certainly look into additional issues before the actual public hearings. I think that's all I was supposed to go over. Go ahead.
I think so. So with regard to the schedule, it's an aggressive schedule because you have prioritized this and have instructed staff that you want us to do whatever we can to get this done by the end of 2020. So we have firmed up some dates that will work. If you greenlight it today, we would be sending notification on Monday, next Monday, the 19th of the zoning code. Sorry, I've got like yard work going on next door, of course, at the most inopportune time. The notice would go Monday of the zoning code amendments because we have to do a 35-day notice. It's just a legal requirement for zoning code amendments. So that'll have to go Monday in order to meet the 35-day notice for the Planning Commission's hearing. We would have a first reading of the county code provisions at your business meeting on November 5th, the second reading at your business meeting on November 19th. The Planning Commission would hold their land use hearing on the corresponding zoning code amendment. And when I say that, that's not the regulations. That's just a piece that says you can do short-term rentals, but you're subject to these standards over here in the county code. So it's a relatively minor change to just point them in the direction of where the rules are. That would happen on November 23rd at the Planning Commission. Then your land use hearing would happen on Wednesday, December 9th. And we would have to then adopt the written ordinance changing the zoning code at your business meeting on December 17th. So it's tight, it's doable, but it's tight. If the one good part, I guess, about this schedule is that if you make it through your first reading and decide we're not ready, or even the second reading and decide we're not ready, we would be able to cancel the zoning code hearings at that point if you decided we're going to stop at this point. So there is that opportunity rather than having the two processes happening at exactly the same time, which would create some complexity. So if we get to that point and for whatever reason at the first or second reading you decide we're not ready to proceed, we could stop the zoning code amendment process, or you could decide to go ahead and amend the zoning code to allow it and not regulate it. So that option would exist at that point. But for the moment, the schedule is set up assuming that you're going to do both. And finally, we had talked at issues last week about the effective date for this program. So it's important to realize that just because we adopt these code provisions doesn't mean the administrative mechanism is in place yet to actually, staff the program. So essentially, we're going to need a website, we're going to need an application form, we're going to need to do some outreach to the public that this is coming. And so our recommendation would be that if you do adopt this, you make it effective July 1st, 2021. So it would all be in place and ready to go, but it gives staff that 6-month window to get it up and running.
So one final topic. Thank you, Jennifer. I want to be clear, in the proposal right now and the discussion we had at issues, I think it was a week or so ago, we would be running the fees and fines component of this program through our standard process as we do throughout that budget cycle, which would be February and March. I will tell you, we are still proposing to come back to you with full cost recovery on this program and whatever that looks like. Secondly, we are still in talks with tourism, although they do not have the funds available now. They may in the future, and there may be some possibility to get some startup money there, but no guarantees can be made at this point in time. Again, the question was raised, if issues arise between now and July 1st, can you choose to delay implementation until we resolve the financial issues and delay the July 1st implementation date? And County Council's response to that was yes. So just some information I want to share. And with that, that concludes our presentation, and we're glad to answer any questions.
Yeah, I'm up first and then Paul. A couple things I was thinking about. This morning, we heard that tourism revenue's higher than anticipated. So while I agree with delaying it, just for economic reasons, to the July of 2021, there is an opportunity through that tourism to perhaps get some money to help set up the website. The other thing is, I think there ought to be a minimum application fee when you're ready. For example, let's say you don't want to go to whatever that amount is, but just to help pay for the software, the person sitting there and stuff, maybe a minimum, maybe it's an online application, a $25 fee is, I was just throwing this out, just to apply online. Something simple to move it forward, to get the names in and start a calculation of how much revenue there is. But the people who are going to benefit from this are not only the people who own the property, but tourism itself will benefit from this. So anyway, I'm just throwing those out. I'm hoping that we don't waste your time and do all this work and then say in December, sorry, we don't want to go any further. So I don't expect any answers. Paul and then Martha.
So as I look down the packet under section 8.10, I see a lot of criteria and basically code ordinances and ordinances. So can I assume that if we adopt that alone, that there is something for code enforcement to act upon if they're in violation of, let's say, parking or electrical or you know, it has those sections, but I would want to make sure that in and of itself, it's an actionable, there are tools in which, or code that can be acted upon. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The key, of course, behind this conversation that we've been sort of struggling with all along is the funding for the staffing to enforce. So it will be enforceable the minute it takes effect. The question is, if there's no dedicated funding source for it, then it falls within the priority schedule. You know, it's those typical issues we sometimes struggle with on the code enforcement side. And that was the idea behind setting the fee ultimately high enough to cover the additional staffing in code enforcement. So that's kind of the issue that's out there. But yes, the county code will be enforceable. In some cases, they're enforcing rules like noise and parking in the right of way that are already on the books that the sheriff's office already enforces. And then we are adopting additional regulations for short-term rentals related to things like on-site parking and garbage service and all of those things that would be newly enforceable when this is adopted.
And that fee also included an additional FTE for finance, if I recall correctly, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. Yes.
All right, so just so I'm clear, so, you know, obviously the nature of short-term rentals is if someone's violating an aspect of this and it's not the homeowner, but is actually the renter, that if they only rent that once for, let's say, 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they violate that, is that any kind of complaint or a violation on the books? Let's say it's something's filed, that goes on the homeowner's record, if you will, not the renter itself, correct? So if they have a habit of renting out a 2-bedroom home to 30 people and it's mayhem, and there's multiple complaints, that all accrues on the homeowner, correct?
I believe that to be correct.
Okay.
The one caveat, keep in mind, we are in partnership with the sheriff's office. So there are some aspects of the sheriff's office. So for example, there's a noise complaint that would still fall within the sheriff's enforcement component. But if it is a land use not meeting those ordinance aspects that will be adopted into the county code, then yes, it would go to the homeowner.
Yeah, and the other one's more of a comment, and that is that, you know, it occurred to me here recently, a few months ago, that that a lot of short-term rentals are being occupied right now because of COVID. People that are in a dangerous environment, they don't want to spread that to their family, so they're finding these short-term rentals or apartments or in hotels, whatever. But it doesn't surprise me that in a sense that COVID in of itself has, you know, attributed, I mean, it's resulted in a little bit more revenue than anticipated for tourism, but it's probably not, you know, the typical tourism type drive that's generating the money. I just think it's this housing COVID combination. But I am curious at a later date as to where that money's being generated at and why.
I'll tell you why after Martha. Martha, you're on mute.
I really appreciate all the work staff's done on this. So I don't want to be negative Nelly, but I may come across that way. What problem, Jim, are we really trying to solve here? Is it life safety? Is it really just generating more money for tourism because, you know, that's a revenue stream, that it's an equity issue between, you know, hoteliers and whatever? I mean, what's the real, like, what's the underlying reason? And I'm asking you this because you have really pushed it,
sure,
which is fine. So tell me, I'm not so worried about, you know, the work that's been done. I mean, it makes sense, but it's going to actually, I said, full cost recovery, because this is like a whole nother structure of enforcement. And we've never, ever had, you know, code enforcement's always been, you know, the agency we constantly revisit because it's so difficult to enforce these kinds of things. So just tell me.
The underlying reason is short-term rentals aren't legal and they're happening anyway.
Right.
You know, I don't care if we don't charge a dime. I just think, or we don't It's just that they're happening and it's not legal. Let's legalize them.
Okay, I guess
But
we could,
if we do that, we need to control that 30 people aren't in a 3-bedroom home disrupting the community. So let's, if we're going to allow it, let's regulate it to prevent that.
so, but it doesn't have anything to do with an additional revenue stream for tourism?
No, my concern is that it's not legal. People are doing it. Let's allow them. But we have, if we allow them, we have to regulate them.
Well, that's like, so it would be an argument of life, health, and safety then.
Yes. And public, protecting neighborhoods too.
Okay, I guess my concern is, have we done enough outreach on the mountain in all these places where they're going to be regulated, or is this going to come as a shock to everybody?
Oh, believe me, we've done a year and a half of outreach
with them.
Yeah.
Hey, Jen or Martha, can you speak to that?
Yeah.
We did, we have, and Martha can give probably more details than I can, but yes, we did extensive outreach, including actually going up to the mountain for a very well-attended weekend event. There's a huge list of interested parties that Martha and Ellen Rogland from PGA have been keeping informed through every step of this. We've had the website, we've had a survey. So yes, the answer is we've done lots of outreach.
Right, and that's good. That makes me feel a lot more comfortable, but I just want to make it clear we're growing a whole nother government bureaucracy, guys. So that always gives me a little angst, particularly because times aren't real good right now. So I'm not convinced, I've never been really clear where it fit in with our strategic plan either, but.
So to clarify, Martha, or Commissioner, pardon me, Schrader.
Call me Martha, I don't care.
Let's be clear, we've done public outreach so folks know about it. Does that mean they're all going to be happy about it? No.
They never are.
And so, I mean, I just want to make sure we're really clear about, we tried to take as much feedback as we could in developing the code. There were some great comments, questions, concerns that were raised. We've incorporated some, not all, of those issues into the code that you see now. And people have not had a chance to speak or testify to this. So I would expect that at your public hearings, you will have a significant number of our citizens show up that want to share their comments, questions, and concerns. So just to share
a lot of people testify on this.
And I want to make it clear, I don't have any issue with you guys and the work you did. I think you did a great job. I'm just having my own set of angst about with fires and COVID and adding a whole nother structure at this time. For me, it's the timing. I feel kind of stuck. Like, why now? When we're not even sure how far along we're going to be with recovery. So it's not you guys, it's just me being, just kind of having some angst. So anyway.
All right. I'm next.
I know you guys did a good job. So
I'm next. The hands up, and frankly, a year and a half ago when we started this, we didn't have a recovery or a virus to worry about.
Oh,
but it didn't move forward. Now I answered Martha's question, and now I'm trying to remember what mine was. What I was raising my hand for. Something Paul said. I forget what it was. I know. One thing I was going to say, Ken, I'm sure did not invent this term, or this saying, but it's keep it simple, stupid. And I think that the less complicated it is, the better. And we have had lots of testimony, but almost all the testimony was the price. It wasn't that we were doing it, because there are people who want to do it. There are people who are concerned that they're going to be charged for having a room in their house that they rent out occasionally. But people are doing it, and if we're going to collect tourism tax, we actually, even if we don't, we still have to legalize it to make these other people whole. Not that You know, it's just that we're doing it. And when I've heard staff say 100 times, people call up and they want to ask about a short-term rental. And we have to say, well, it's not allowed. Then they do it anyway. So anyway, Sonia, Ken, and Paul.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on Martha's question to you, Jim. We were almost ready to pass this, and then we sent it back for just a little more work. And we all know what happened. But my interest, I was very compelled, and it was mostly out of the community leaders meeting when we would hear the stories of what happens when there's a whole new use, because Airbnbs haven't been around that long. I mean, the internet has created new opportunities for us as a community. But when there are 15 people in a 3-bedroom house or more, and the problems that can come with that, it was a lot of the activities in the neighborhoods and the commercialization of our neighborhoods, which was, I heard loud and clear, and which is why we did so much work, staff did so much work. I would really like to get this done. I think it was very thoughtful and very targeted towards our specific uniqueness in Clackamas County, which I think is here now as it was pre-COVID. It'd be good just to wrap this up. So that's my thought.
So before I go to Ken, I remember Paul. So we have a short-term rental that people this time of year would never go to because it's 120 degrees. They are so happy to get out of town and go away and stay by themselves, that rentals are, short-term rentals are out, sky high. That's why the short-term rental, not in Clackamas County, but tourism in general is up. People just cannot wait to get out of their house. And that's true. Ken and then Paul.
Much of this came about because of complaints from citizens who've had to deal with the people who misbehave. And so a good portion of this is that since it's happening anyway, you legalize it, you have a structure that's an enforceable structure around it, and then you can deal with the miscreants that don't handle things right. So that was a big part of the impetus. I can tell you, I went to at least 4 of the public meetings and listened to the people's concerns, whether it was residents or proprietors. And quite a number of the suggestions that came out of those meetings were incorporated in staff's work. And I think the staff's to be commended for that. And the majority of people were in favor of it in general terms. There were specifics in terms of details that some people liked and some people didn't like, but overall understood the need and the reasoning. So I am prepared to move forward with this. And I think your schedule is fine.
Okay, Paul.
So something you said, Jim, that I just, I just completely disagree with.
Okay.
And that is, it was all about the price. Okay. That the testimony you heard was all about the price. And I have a completely different memory.
Yeah.
And Ken touched on it. The very first public meeting we went at that staff put on, it was all about the complaints of the neighbors. It was the impacts. It was basically code enforcement issues that weren't being acted on, or law enforcement issues that were not being acted on. That was the rallying cry, and it carried in all the way to our meetings. And granted, there were some of the operators that were concerned about the price. I don't want to discount that, but I will tell you that at every meeting, there were people there that were advocating, some of which are friends of yours were advocating, and friends of mine that were advocating for more code enforcement because of the impacts of that. So that is the driver that I'm involved in this, and why my questions earlier were based upon what's actionable as far as holding people accountable for not complying with the code.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Martha? You're on mute, Martha. There you go.
I guess listening to Paul, why don't we just try and give money to, code enforcement, really. That's really mostly what it is, isn't it? It's a code enforcement issue. And we're just putting, I mean,
If I get this wrong, Jennifer, let me know, or Martha.
Okay.
I think our original estimate was one additional FTE for finance to assist in implementing the program. And then secondly, was it one additional FTE in code enforcement to assist with the complaints that might arise from it as well.
Okay.
And so,
All right.
and those dollars, those are actual costs. Those are costs that we are going to have to pay. And so you basically take those dollars and extrapolate those out across the permitting and what we think the permitting number will be. That's how we came to the number of permits that we got, or the cost per permit.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul, I wasn't suggesting that the impetus was the cost. I was suggesting that once we decided to move forward on this, the biggest complaint was the cost. Now people want, if we're going to charge, they want us to enforce. Heard that loud and clear. If we're going to allow them, they want enforcement. In order to enforce, we have to charge a higher fee. So we're just, so I totally agree with you. It's neighborhood livability, just everything to do about livability. And the other reason is it's not legal. If they're doing it anyway, let's legalize it and make it a fair process. Anyway, do you want to add anything, Paul?
No, you got it right. I didn't want the emphasis or the emphasis to be lost in that it was, distilled down and simplified down to, oh, it's about the cost, when, really, the rallying cry has been from the very beginning, again, the neighborhood impacts to the bad operators, right? I mean, there's a lot of good operators out there that don't have that issue. I'm good with them. Don't have it, but there's a few bad actors that have just made life miserable. And it's not just Oregon, it's not just Clackamas County, it's across the country.
Yeah. So Gary, did you get a clear answer there?
Yes, that we're going to go forward with the process staff has described, and then you can vote as you wish, commissioners, when the time comes. But there seems to be clarity to go forward with the timeline Jennifer described. So staff, let's do that.
And whose dog is that? And they agree. Oh, Ken. All right, well, great. Thank you, guys. What else we got, Gary?
That is all for today, Chair.
Great. Well, thank you all very much and have a great day, and I'll see you whenever.